why we're here is our responsibility to fix. We can blame the media, we can blame anti-Semitism, we can blame a bunch of stuff. But in the end, when you want to fix a problem, you've got to take responsibility for it and see first where we went wrong and what we're doing.
What is home? Yes, we have our homeland Israel, and yes, we have homes throughout the diaspora. But our current reality is complex. Israel's at war, and anti-Semitism is rising around the world. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for this question of home? Join me, Izzy, as I speak with Israeli and diaspora Jewry to better understand this new complex reality and unpack where we put ourselves in this physical and spiritual war. This is the My Israel Narrative podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of My Israel Narrative. Today we are sitting down with Joanna Landau, who I think is doing, and I just mentioned to you, some incredible work and really what I see as uncharted territory for Israel and for the Jewish people. Really, you've branded yourself as someone who, and I'll just quote it from your website because I think it's really unique, that you help businesses, NGOs, the Israeli government, and the global Jewish community tell Israel's story to the world. And we all know how important this is today. It was important years ago when you started. You founded an organization called Vibe Israel, which was doing this, is continuing to do this in an incredible way. And it's something that is very nuanced, I'm sure, and you've learned a lot about over the years and shifted and pivoted, and I'm sure the past few months especially. So just would love to dive in and hear a little bit more about how you kind of even got to this place. To kick it off, if you want to just share anything you want us to know about you, an interesting fact, a fun fact, and maybe even something from the past few months that's really shifted for you, changed for you, kind of where you are today.
Yeah. So if anybody knew me before October 7th, they would know that the one word that I never used to tell Israel's story, or the way that I believe in telling Israel's story is hasbara, which in English is hasbara, but basically, people call it public diplomacy, Israel advocacy. We can call it whatever we want to call it, but for those of you who don't speak Hebrew, it means to explain, right? It's the sort of how we explain Israel. And I never used to use that word. I would like if anybody said to me hasbara when I was kind of presenting what I do, I would be like, no, I don't do hasbara. And the reason is that I don't explain Israel. I tell Israel's story, which is a very different way of engaging an audience. When you explain yourself, you tend to be defensive and you tend to make assumptions about what the audience is thinking. And you start, your whole story from that point of view. Whereas I do what's called country and nation branding and marketing, which is all about storytelling and who are we and things like that. So that's the fun fact about me, is that I never use the word hasbara, and now post October 7, I'm hardcore involved in the hasbara of Israel for obvious reasons. But basically what led me there is that for over a decade through Vibe Israel, which is a nonprofit I established back in 2009-10, I've been promoting Israel through influencers, through digital influencers. So it's Instagrammers, bloggers, YouTubers, bringing them to Israel, non-Jews, and showing them Israel through the perspective that they and their audience are interested in. So it could be about food, and it could be about women entrepreneurs, and it could be about design or travel or a variety of different topics. But the idea was always to find an audience that didn't really care about Israel, and how do we tell that story? How do we make them care? And that was very successful. We generated over 1 billion positive mentions about Israel online, which was really great. Of course, right now, trying to tell Israel's story about, our great food and, how cool Tel-Aviv is and all that stuff, that's not exactly what we're going to be doing right now. But certainly long term, I think that's the way we need to go. And what I'm doing right now is that I'm working with the government and with different organizations, whether it's the business sector, Jewish organizations. I give lectures thinking strategically about how to manage Israel's image in the post-October 7 reality. I'll leave it at that because otherwise it'll take up the entire conversation.
I'm just curious, really quickly, is this relevant for other countries? Like this kind of work?
Yeah. So that's the thing. I discovered this industry called country branding and nation branding back in 2010. And it's an industry that developed about 10 years earlier. It started in the beginning of this century, which basically said you could really brand or market a place like you do a product. So if I'm going to sell my iPhone, or if I want to promote Apple, or Coca-Cola or hamburgers and McDonald's, how do I do that? How do I make sure that of all the cell phones in the world, people are going to buy the iPhone? And so we know that that has a lot to do with branding and marketing and making sure that people come across the product wherever it is that they're looking. You bring the product to them, whether it's the news sources or the experiences that they have, the product is always there. And the same is correct for countries and cities and places. And almost every single country has a national branding agency. It has that sort of thinking, like a marketing thinking, about how do I make sure that the target audience that I want to be engaged with Israel, in our case, is really engaged. I need to go find them. I need to make sure that they know we exist and so on. And unfortunately, the one country that doesn't have it is the one country that needs it most. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why we found ourselves on October 7th in such a bizarre situation where the worst thing in the world happened to us, and we find ourselves still needing to explain ourselves. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that many people around the world don't know who Israel is and don't know the values of the Israeli people and not connected enough. Certainly we can see it with young people. And so that's all I've been saying for the last decade is we need to do exactly what Saudi Arabia is doing, and Estonia and Turkey and China, and they're all doing what's called country branding. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to go back to quite shortly and help the community do that as well.
It's incredible. It is fascinating to think that, obviously we know there's this disproportionate obsession with Israel, right, in the media and all these things, yet they don't understand the place. They don't have a grasp on it, and that's...
Well, see, that's the thing. I always think that it's very easy. I wrote a book about this whole thing and where are we going wrong and how can we fix it. And I think it starts with the understanding that a lot of why we're here is our responsibility to fix. We can blame the media, we can blame anti-Semitism, we can blame a bunch of stuff. But in the end, when you want to fix a problem, you've got to take responsibility for it and see first where we went wrong and what we're doing. And part of that is when I say we, I mean the global Jewish community, the state of Israel, the Israeli people. Most of the time, we are the ones who have really packaged the Israel story through the very narrow lens of either conflict or religion. That's how we tell the story, and that's what the story of Israel is to the world. The story that I was telling was about, lifestyle and about values that people can connect to with, or things that they love, like food or music or, entrepreneurship and things like that. Whenever Israel does that, whenever it puts its best foot forward, based on shared values and common areas of interest, it does really well. I mean, we see it with the Startup Nation, we see it with the Eurovision, we see it with formats for TV, our Israeli food. Whenever Israel kind of presents itself in a really inspiring way that can connect with very big audiences, they're like, oh, that's interesting, I didn't know that, how fascinating. And I remember I went to see the band's Visit on Broadway. I don't know if you went to see it. It's a very small Israeli movie about an Egyptian band that got lost in Israel as they were coming to give some kind of performance, and they get stuck in some very random place in the middle of the desert, and they connect with the Israelis living there. And obviously between Egypt and Israel, there's not a lot of love going on over there, but through this very small human story, they created real connections, and it turned into a very successful Broadway musical, like super successful. So I went to see it when I was in New York. And I'm sitting there, and all these New Yorkers around me, maybe a lot of them were Jewish, I don't know, but they loved it. They were, and what I think that they loved, other than the fact that it was a lovely story, there was really great kind of Middle Eastern music in it as well. Um, and people engage with that. They like the East meets
Mm.
West, and Israel has that. It's the same with our food and fashion. So these are things that we can tell, but we're the ones who are not telling it. Right now, for obvious reasons, in the middle of a war, you can't start talking about how lovely your hummus is. But before, and hopefully very shortly after, that's what we need to be doing if we want to engage, especially young people. We got to give them a reason to become interested.
So that's always something that's struck me, that we can't, that yes, there is a kind of easy way to connect religiously, and even if you have this like more oriental like Zionism piece in a second, but a lot of people maybe don't find themselves in either of those pools, so then they kind of just feel like, okay, so it's, yeah, it's a place. I'm talking about like other Jews, like for the Jewish people, then it's like, okay, then I don't know. Yeah, it's a nice place. And what I've been trying to speak about more right now, that I think it actually, your work is not so separate today, like what you were doing before is not so separate from what's happening today, because at least for the Jewish people and they're creating an authentic connection with Israel, the fear that I have is that people are going to only latch onto Israel as a place of refuge, God forbid, or of, a place to run, or and that's not why we have Israel. Like it's just not. That's my firm belief. Others might disagree, but that is not. Maybe it's a byproduct of having the state, but it's not the reason for it. So I think what you're talking about giving people an angle, both, okay, fine, also outside of the Jewish people, right? Just an authentic angle to connect is so important, and even more so, I think, right now. Obviously, we have other work that's like, comes with that, and there's a lot happening. So I get, you have to like pick the focus in a way, but I think it's all really, really important. And I would just love to hear from you, what, like, I saw you wrote an article quite recently. I mean, it was pre-October 7th, about why you chose Israel. And it was beautiful.
Yeah.
And I love if you could just share a little bit about, like your origin story of Israel, and how this kind of all began.
So it's actually an excerpt from the foreword of my book. I co-wrote it with an American author called Michael Golden, and we both wrote our origin stories. Like, why did we come to write this book? Why I chose to, and why he chose to. And I wrote, first of all, that it's the active choice, right? It's not just there. It's an active choice of living here. And I say that because I wasn't born here, and I could leave any time. I'm British originally. My husband's American. We have, my kids have 3 passports. They used to be, certainly the British one used to be much more valuable because it was the whole European Union. Now it's just the UK, but okay. And I feel that I make that choice of living in Israel every time anew. And it's a tough choice. It's not an easy choice because it's not an easy country. And so I asked myself, what on earth am I still doing here? Why am I doing this? And this is, of course, pre-October 7. Okay, so remember a time when we thought that anti-Semitism was, kept at bay, and where, Israel was doing pretty well also globally, and Gal Gadot is Wonder Woman, and Jimmy Fallon loves her, and all these different things. Okay, so remember back in those great days, which were only 4 months ago, and I realized when I wrote this, I wrote it sort of 2022, that I live here and I choose Israel. My parents made the choice for me. So I was 4 or 5 years old. My father was religious. My mother became religious for him in the UK, and they came to live in Israel because that was the manifestation of their sort of connection. And I grew up in Israel. I went back to England to boarding school because I didn't really feel like I fit in. I was very English for Israel. And then I came back for the army. And it was in the army that I connected with the country. And I connected because I liked the diversity of the people. I liked the fact that people were not like me. I liked the fact that I was a part of something that was more important than me. There's something very community-oriented in Israel, and very mission-oriented, right? There's like, you're doing something bigger. And I recently read a book by Daniel Gordis, and he spoke about Israel being a country with a purpose. There are not that many countries with a purpose, right? America's a country with a purpose, kind of to whatever we can talk about whether we're there or not, but ideally to protect, democracy, freedom, opportunity, so on. Israel's a country with a purpose to provide safe refuge and I know we're going to talk about Zionism, but when we talk about Zionism, the idea is sort of not just to have the state, but Herzl called it an infinite ideal, right? You keep on wanting to make it better all the time. And to me, that's why I choose Israel. I just love living here, okay? It's not got to do with the religion so much. I find it very easy to be Jewish here, and I'm very proudly Jewish, but not religiously Jewish. Much more kind of like the kind of, I guess, Jewish that a lot of Americans are, where you kind of, you're not kosher and you don't go to temple all day long, but you're very connected to your Jewish identity. So that's what I'm like. And in Israel, you don't have to try hard. You completely can be Jewish, and it's all just there and easy. And I know when the holidays are and the holy days, and we do kiddush and all that kind of stuff. So that's one reason why I choose to live here, so that I can be Jewish in a really, really easy way, which I think is quite an attractive offering, because the elements, the beautiful sides of Judaism, the community, the tikkun olam, all these different things, you can really do it here very, very easily. The second thing is that I like my friends here. I like my lifestyle here. It's a very good quality of life. I like raising children here. I'm intellectually stimulated. There's great culture. The weather is good. I mean, I just really like it. It's not a huge kind of, there's no heavy duty sort of, I have to think about it all day long. No, it's really quite simple to me. And that's why I guess I relate very much to the idea of country branding, because if you live in America, you don't sort of have this whole rational process, or in Paris, or in, I don't know, Tahiti. You don't sit all day long and say, why do I live here? What's the connection? You just really like the place. You're comfortable, right? That's the same to me for Israel. And I think Israel is a country that punches way above its weight. And I don't think people know it. If they came here, I don't mean come here on birthright and have a nice time. And I don't even mean stay on Masa for a few months. I mean, when you come and live here, it's not easy, but there are certain aspects to it that I don't think you can find anywhere else, where one of them is being Jewish in a really easy way. And the second thing is that community connection, where you're just part of something that people will have your back, and people come together. We see it now, and I invite everybody who's watching this to come to Israel to visit, not on a solidarity mission if they don't feel they want to, but just there's this sense of connection that I just don't see in other countries. And it obviously happens in times like these, but it's like on steroids right now, which is kind of, 2023 was a tough year for Israelis who are not religious or right-wing, or, it was a tough year to justify this very complicated country. And after October 7th, you kind of sit and you say, you know what, I can't find this connection anywhere else. So to me, this is why Israel is my home. I'd rather be somewhere connected that I care about than living comfortably, but I don't know who my next door neighbor is, But it's all about that.
It's beautiful. I actually, there's a Netflix series, so Blue Zones, where the gentleman went about and he studied, right, he went to 7 cities or towns in the world, and studied places with the largest population of centenarians, right? People that live to 100, something like that. And it was pretty clear through basically everything he was saying. The common thread that I saw, I didn't finish the whole series, but from what I did see, that everything was about purpose and connection to family, connection to food and cooking together and coming together. We know from a psychological standpoint that gives you the most fulfillment in life. And
there's the longest standing piece of research, I think, by Harvard University, although Harvard is a 4-letter word right now, but Harvard did a very long standing piece of research, about 50 years, trying to understand happiness, trying to understand and they found that the number one most important thing for happy people and a good sort of life is the relationships that you have around you,
Sure.
right? The strong connections and community, and certainly Israel is one of those places that can give it to you,
Yeah.
big time.
And authenticity. That was a big thing that I experienced in living there. Even as a religious person, I found that I could be more authentically religious in Israel. Um,
Yeah,
that might be
you
obvious
just
to some,
are.
but it's also, yeah, because you just are. You're who you are.
You just are. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to, it's like anything, whatever goes, right? There's something very freeing about that feeling. It's not so structured and it's not so, I think that's why, we still don't understand the need for pronouns here. Because we're like, call me whatever you want. I don't really care, if what you want me to call you, whatever. It's fine. But I'm not going to put it in my Zoom description, right? When I sign up to a conference in America now, and it says to me, "What's my preferred pronoun?" Honestly, I don't care. Whatever you want to do, what you want. It's all good. And that gray zone that we live in very, very comfortably in Israel, I think that's part of the big difference between us and other cultures. We live very comfortably in very unclear areas. We don't really like the very clear guidelines, and I think that's obviously one of the things that we're facing when we face what's going on negatively towards Israel outside of Israel.
Right. It creates a challenge, but it's a worthwhile challenge.
Yes.
So I guess to take it back, you started bringing up the idea of Zionism and Herzl's definition of Zionism. Can you actually explain the origin of Zionism, how you understand it, and kind of where it's evolved to today?
Yeah, I mean, I see it mostly as the political movement that says, the Jewish nation needs to have a state because if they don't, then, you know, back then, they just were not able to manifest themselves fully. And I think that to this day that I think Zionism, I don't like that honestly, that we're a little bit hung up on it. I think that it's a complicated word
Mm.
to explain to a lot of people. The very fact that you are asking me that question, to me, if I'm trying to think forward, far forward, okay, into the future, and young people and so on, um, the more complicated the terminology, the less I would want to focus the attention on that terminology. Because one of our problems is that everything's so complicated when it comes to Israel. If and Zionism in Israel, for example, when we talk about Tzionut, it just means loving Israel. We and Herzl and a picture of him standing on a balcony, like that's the story. And then it's really interesting to see when we look at 2023 and obviously the rifts that happened in Israeli society. The one of the things that happened was that the secular society felt that the sort of the religious Zionism was kind of appropriating the word Zionism, right, to themselves. So if you hold an Israeli flag, then you're by definition, right wing or believe in Israel on account of everything else and so on. And the people on the left side were like, well, I'm also Zionist and I also like waving my flag, so like why can't I do that as well? And that's why the flag became the main icon of the protest movement, because what's going on in Israel is almost like what was going on in Israel before October 7 was almost like this kind of clash between what does Zionism mean today? What's the Zionism of the future? Is it going to be that sort of you talk about Israel, and we're only talking about the 75% of Israel who are Jews, because there are 25% who are not.
Right.
Are they part of Israel or not? Or are they just like unwelcome guests, and they just have to, play, join the situation, or are they equal partners to this whole thing? So it was a very, very controversial conversation, and to me, Zionism is that infinite ideal. It's the place that you can manifest your Jewishness, whichever way you choose to manifest it. Clearly, that does not come through in the way that the government does control some of like if I want to get married and I'm not religious, I still have to get married through religious means. And if I want to get divorced, I still have to go to the rabbinate, right? But, we find ways that's the gray area where we find ways of figuring that part out. And that was a lot of the conversation that was taking place in 2023 of how do we balance it out? How is it that in Israel you've got, a gay member of Knesset who's the head of the Knesset in a Knesset that's right-wing, ultra-Orthodox? Something's going on there. To me, that's Zionism. I think it's great,
Yeah, I think, again, as I would say, as a religious Jew, I definitely connect more to Israel from, I would say, both the religious and the just Zioni, loving the nation, the land. But what I've always, I didn't grow up religious, so what I've always tried to, having been in both worlds and still in both worlds, is really understand, like, we are this people that is just very colorful, and we have a lot going on, and there's a whole picture out there. I do think it gets more complicated and what I mean by that is that we all need to live together and be together and accept each other, and that like there's no question. Where it does get more complicated is, I guess, in terms of when you're trying to lay down the law and the and create an actual structure and a system and whatever, and that's where all this tension comes about. But as a person, human to human, person to person, so yes, I want Israel to also be a place where, and also, we have welcomed non-Jewish guests, as long as I, as a Jew, can rightfully feel safe and at home and at peace in my place.
Yeah, it's always not
no issue with.
No, I mean, if it's on account of my personal safety, then that's where I draw the line.
Right.
But we have to remember that Herzl himself was, and the whole Zionist movement, the political movement, were not religious.
Right.
Like, it wasn't a religion. Like they didn't even, they thought they were going to be wearing suits and dancing the waltz in Tel Aviv. That was the vision. They weren't, that was the whole vision for Israel was actually a rather secular vision of Israel in terms of the political Zionism. What it turned into is this mishmash of both, and we're trying to find that balance. That's what happened in 2023. That's what came to a head. Is where is that balance? That pendulum seems to swing too far to the left for the right wingers and too far to the right for the left wingers, and the Orthodox is also either right or left or somewhere in the middle or wherever they want to be, and everybody's trying to find their place, and we were off balance in 2023. That kind of is what was going on here. I don't know if you were here during the protests, and
yeah,
you could feel it, right? You suddenly had people walking next to you, and you've got people wearing a kippah and people wearing practically nothing and walking together chanting the same, we want democracy or whatever. And that was actually quite uniting in a rather odd way.
I felt, I kept thinking that. I said, well, if you look at it, everybody is holding an Israeli flag. Meaning, like, everybody just wants a place there. And I think it's a message also for diaspora Jewry that was so, in a way, judgmental about what was happening and so harsh and criticizing to the government and this and wherever you stood on the political spectrum, that the message for someone looking from the outside in should really be, well, look, they're fighting for it because they believe in it and they want to uphold this place. For you to now turn around and say, I want nothing to do with this place, that's counterintuitive to what they're trying to do.
Yeah. And it's not, I mean, we're all here, right? We're all here, and we all have to just somehow learn to live together. And the thing is that I've always felt that somehow we did manage to do that. It did come to a head in 2023. I don't know what it's going to be like in 2024 because of October 7th changed a lot. And kind of made people reevaluate a lot, for good and for bad. So we'll see what it's like. But I think it made us rediscover one another and what we do for one another. And the if we just take the example of Zaka, the people who go around and they kind of help pick up what's left after these horrible massacres, mostly very religious people. They do a job that all of us are so grateful for. And I think only somebody who has such a strong, true conviction of a God and religion and can do a job like that, because it's so harrowing to have to be the person who comes to to a place after a massacre, and you know, you see it on the news, and secular people sitting there, and they're seeing these people, and they're saying, thank goodness that we have them, that they're doing this, you know, and United Hatzalah and all these different things that, you know, we're all kind of meeting one another, and rediscovering one another, and I hope that it will be something that fixes us. I hope that we won't go back to the pre-October 7, 2023. To me, that would be a very sad state of affairs. I think, if anything, we need to realize that something happened. This is an amazing place. We need to cherish it and keep it, and understand how we do that together. And we all have to compromise. That's just the way it's going to be. I hope that's what will happen.
I hope so too. I hope so too. From all angles. I mean, from us sitting here in the diaspora, yeah, I keep praying. I think we spoke about a lot in COVID, right? I hope things actually change. I think the difference this time around was this was so personal. This was so deeply entrenched. It is so deeply entrenched for us, for each of us, that I can't imagine going back. Like, to me, it's like, what? Go back to what? Like, this is it. Like, this is where we're supposed to be. This feels, as much as it's maybe scary and we don't understand what's happening and confusing, the way that we are being as a people feels much better than the alternative. So why would we go back? You know, and I think that's what people do. To remind yourselves, like, okay, now, and that's why I'm also so focused now on, like, building the connection with Israel, building the connection with people around you, because these are the moments that you can create something real and visceral that'll then carry you forward. Hopefully in the future. So on that note, I know that part of your mission is leveraging social media and influencer marketing to make Israel matter to millennials and Gen Zers. Just briefly, I think you touched on it in different pieces here, but, like, what does that mean, make Israel matter?
Yeah. So it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, when the difference between hasbara and branding and things like that. So when we're advocating for Israel, we're having a rational debate in which we're, you know, facts, figures, information, they're wrong, I'm right, blah, blah, blah. We don't seem to be particularly successful in that situation, not for lack of trying, right? It's mainly because of a bunch of things like, you know, facts, alternative facts, media bias, social media effect, and so on. And when I say make the country matter, what I mean is to touch on their emotional connection. I don't think this is about, and in general, connecting to anything is not a rational process. It's almost like, you know, in marketing and sales, there's a sales funnel. You don't just see something and like, oh great, I'm going to buy it. There's a whole process that goes on. It's very emotional. It's quite quick. You don't even notice that you're going through it. And that's where the branding comes in. It's like, do I want to be associated with this thing? Am I connected? Do I know it exists? What is it offering me? What are the values? The moment that it's worth it for me, like, it's all the what's in it for me to be associated with this country called Israel. And if I'm a 22-year-old in Austin, Texas, not Jewish, or if I'm a 28-year-old Jewish woman in, I don't know, New York or Paris or wherever, what's in it for me to connect with Israel? That's what I mean by making Israel matter. Because I don't necessarily need people to agree with Israel's policies. I don't agree with a lot of countries' policies. It doesn't stop me from visiting them as tourists. I'm not going to go to Iran anytime soon, or Qatar, okay? Because kind of I'm not into that thing. But, you know, tons of Israelis used to visit Turkey because it's got a great tourist product, okay? Really does. Right now we probably won't, because emotionally we're like, yeah, no, we're not going there. They're part of the ones who don't like us very much. But most people don't make decisions rationally. They make decisions emotionally. And when they connect emotionally with a country, then they're willing to buy the products made in that country and to go as visitors and to maybe relocate there for work, of course, make aliyah, things like that. And they accept all the negatives with it because they emotionally connect, right? I don't think my husband's perfect, but I love him, right? I hope he's not watching this. He knows. But I take, you know, the connection that I have with him, and I accept the negative aspects that are in it. Nobody's perfect. No country is perfect. And when we try to advocate for Israel, we're trying to reach a level of acceptance and agreement with Israel we're never going to get. Like, it's very, very difficult to get because Israel is super complicated. And sometimes it does things that are controversial. So we might not get full agreement. And we might not get people, hashtag I stand with Israel. But if they don't hashtag I stand with Israel and they do come over on a vacation, as far as I'm concerned, that's saying I stand with Israel without actually saying it. And the more they do that, the more engaged they become. The more they go to Israeli restaurants and eat Israeli food and enjoy musicals about Israel and just see Israel in a way that emotionally is positive, that seeps into their rational understanding of Israel. And to use difficult language, it gives them context.
Yeah.
Okay, it's like your best friend does something wrong. You're like, well, wait a minute. I know the guy, right? Or I know her. That's not their values.
Right.
Let me give them a second. Let me see what it's all about. I don't just rush into the decision. That's what I mean by making Israel matter. It's an emotional connection that we've always missed out on because of the way we've tried to tell Israel's story, which has been very much through the angle of, do you agree or don't you agree with Israel's policies? If you agree, you're with me. If you don't agree, you're not with me. It's not the case. Half of Israel doesn't agree with Israel's policies. So what? I don't think all Americans agree with everybody's policies all the time. So what? Right? So that's what I meant.
It's always interesting. Like, we create this double standard for ourselves. It's like, I live in America. I don't hear people talk. I mean, they'll criticize the American, but are they thinking about picking up and taking their money out of America and not living? No, not in a million years. Like, you just live when you cross your mind. So why do we overcomplicate it for ourselves? It is predicated on the fact that a lot of our connection sometimes is up here in our minds, and the intellectual and the debates and the politics, and you have to move it down and say, wait, what's real connection? Through our emotional side. So.
What I like to do as a sort of mental exercise to make it easier for me to understand what kind of messaging and what kind of stories will work with other people is to imagine that we're not talking about Israel. Imagine we're talking about another country. Imagine everybody has a country that they really don't care about. Like, they have no interest in whatsoever. They're not interested, or they don't really like very much, or whatever. And you ask yourself, what could they say that would pique my interest, that would get my attention? And that's the pre-October 7th, okay? After October 7th, of course, it's more complicated, but it's still in the same realm. The idea is we're overly emotional about Israel. And if we put our emotions aside and view it as a country that just needs, people to engage with it, then we start having the ability to think strategically. Who's our target audiences? How do we get to them? What kind of messaging works with them? And don't get so offended when they're not willing to engage, and so on and so forth. I know that what I'm saying might be taken with a grain of salt because we know we have a major issue with Gen Z, especially in the United States. And I absolutely think we need to work very hard there. But, this is all doable. I do feel that we can improve Israel's image tremendously. We just need to do it in a way that is suited to the audience, and not what I want to hear, but what I want to say, but what they want to hear, and where they're at.
Yeah.
Okay, on social media, on the platforms that they engage with, that kind of thing. And then you see that Israel manages to come out with flying colors. It does happen.
I hope so. So just to close us off, I always like to ask, in your own words, as few or as many as you'd like, just what is home for you? And I was like, you don't have to use Israel in the sentence.
Home for me is where my family is, where my friends are, where I belong, and especially it's where I can manifest myself in the best way possible. I think that's what home for me is all about. And then for the Jewish world, there's another home. It's like my mum's home, right? Israel. It's a place that you can always go to. You're always welcome. You don't live there, but it's always yours as well. That's it's almost like the house that you grew up in. It's still there. You can always go back to it if you wanted to. And if you're Israeli, then it's the house you're already living in.
I love that. It's a place you can always go if you don't live there. If you're Israeli, it's where you already live. Beautiful.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so much, really.
Thank you very much, and good luck with your mission. I think it's super important. I think the Israelis and the Jewish world need to connect much better and to understand one another. And that's the basis for Israel's a global Jewish story. It's not just Israel's story. And I think that we need to do better at that as well.
I think so. That's the key message right there. It's for all of us. Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Israel Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow along and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Yisrael Chai.